There's only a few personalities in South African history that have sparked as much controversy as John Dunn, the so-called white chief of Zululand. Some revere him as a mediator between cultures, while others argue that he was a traitor who used his position to destabilize the Zulu kingdom for personal and colonial gain. In this video, we will explore the life of John Dunn, his legacy, and the recent claims that the Zulu are white people. John Robert Dunn was born in Port Natal, now Durban, in 1834. His father, Robert Newton Dunn, was a Scottish settler who moved to the Eastern Cape frontier around 1820. Growing up in a frontier society, John Dunn became fluent in isiZulu and well skilled with handling rifles. By the time Dunn came of age, Port Natal had transitioned from a semi-independent trading enclave to a British colony. The early traders often married African women, and while this was common, it did not make them Zulu, nor align them with African interests. In the 1850s, Dunn turned his back on Natal's increasingly rigid colonial society and sought refuge in Zululand. King Betrayal, recognizing Dunn's fluency in isiZulu and knowledge of Natal's political dynamics, invited him to be an advisor. This was a political strategic move by King Betrayal. Dunn's ability to navigate both African and colonial worlds seemed valuable at the time when tensions between the Zulu kingdom and the British colonial authorities were rising. The king granted Dunn land and status, which allowed him to accumulate cattle and eventually nearly 48 Zulu wives. But Dunn's allegiance was never absolute. While he adopted certain Zulu customs, he also exploited his unique position for personal gain. Despite the image of loyalty often painted by colonial accounts, Dunn ultimately played a pivotal role in undermining the Zulu kingdom. The Anglo-Zulu War of 1879 marked a turning point for Dunn. Initially attempting to remain neutral, he soon sided with the British. Appointed as a military intelligence officer by Lord Chelmsford, Dunn used his knowledge of the Zulu kingdom to spy and provide critical intelligence to the British forces. His betrayal to King Betrayal is a stark reminder of his opportunistic nature. While Dunn secured wealth and power for himself, being rewarded with land and trade monopolies, his actions contributed to the downfall of the Zulu kingdom and the erosion of Zulu sovereignty. After the Anglo-Zulu War, Dunn was appointed as one of 13 chiefs under the Ulundi Treaty of 1879. He received the wealthiest chiefdom, controlling nearly one-fifth of Zululand and various trade monopolies. The post-war settlement that made Dunn wealthy also destabilized Zululand, sowing the seeds of its eventual destruction. John Dunn died on August 1895 at his home in Moyenne. After Dunn's death, disputes arose over the distribution of his property. Within 2 years of Dunn's death, natural disasters, economic hardships, and the colonial land policies decimated the Dunn's community's wealth, leaving his descendants impoverished. From 1898 onwards, many of Dunn's descendants were forced to migrate to Natal, the Transvaal, and the Cape for work. The diaspora has continued, with descendants settling as far afield as the UK, Canada, Australia, and the US. One of John Dunn's descendants was Gladstone Dunn, John Dunn's grandson, who became a spokesperson for the Dunn's community in the 1950s. promoting sugarcane production to improve the community's prosperity and reduce migration. Gladstone's son, Daniel Dunn, became the chairman of the John Dunn Descendants Association in 1974 and worked on promoting unity and pride in their heritage. John Dunn had about 117 children from 48 Zulu women and 1 Cape Malayan woman. Some of Dunn's descendants were classified as colored during the apartheid era, and others remained with the Zulu identity. So to claim that Zulu are white people because of Robert Dunn is misguided and historically inaccurate. We have to keep in mind that this was a common thing. It was happening everywhere where the settlers came and found natives. It was not exclusive to AmaZulu. There's a video that we did called AmaZulu Kingdom. Make sure you watch it to get a clear background on the Zulu nation. To dispel this saying of AmaZulu are white people, John Dunn was invited and welcomed by AmaZulu. They even called him Jandoni. He became the advisor and negotiator for the king, King Cetshwayo, meaning the Zulu nation was already established and organized. Many of Dunn's descendants who continued to assimilate and marry within the Zulu community, they are Zulu because the black gene is forever dominant. Now that was John Robert Dunn, the white Zulu chief. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Until the next one, thank you for watching.